True crimers, welcome to Break the Case. I'm your host. I'm Jen Coffindaffer. Looking forward today to cussing and discussing Sebastian Rogers. That's what we're going to start off with. A very, very special guest is going to be joining us. She has actually been on a couple of other shows, but those interviews weren't conducted and pointed, in my opinion, in the area of actual facts and exactly what we might know in terms of Sebastian and canines. This has been something that from the beginning of this case, I always felt confused about. And this is why I was confused. Depending on who you listen to, whether it was Chris Proudfoot, even Sescamp, if you listen to different reports about whether there was assent, whether there wasn't assent. It was all extremely complicated and confusing. I know I posted several times about the actual footage from the body-worn camera of the officer who was actually tracking the scent that went away from the house toward that retention pond near that construction area. But let me set up the case really quick before our guest comes on. For those who might not know who Sebastian Rogers is, Sebastian Rogers disappeared on February 25th through 26th. We really don't know the last real proof of life. And when I say proof of life, that is an independent source that isn't just relying on an individual that last would have seen them, the mother, in this case, Katie Proudfoot's words, but actually we know he was alive because of footage from a restaurant. That was the 25th. We know that according to Katie Proudfoot, she put him to bed that night. It was a school night, Sunday night, and into the night, somewhere 10, 11, there's different time frames given, but somewhere in that general time frame, she heard a loud noise. At one point, it was explained, and then later she calls it a thud. I've always had a few issues with that, but in any event, I'm just going to stick with facts right now, not going off what that could or couldn't mean. That was the last noise heard from Sebastian's room. She hollered at him, "Be quiet in there, get to bed, stop what you're doing," words to that effect. And the next morning at 6, when she went to go get him, he was not there. So then she contacted Chris Proudfoot. That is her husband, who was purportedly working. He worked construction type work in a construction type area out of the area, and contacted him. And then they called, not via 911, but via a sheriff's office direct line to report Sebastian missing. I just kind of wanted to lay the groundwork because some people have possibly never heard of this case. Who we are going to welcome to the stage today, and I'm super excited. I had been speaking with her for some length of time about coming on, is Julia Valente. As I said, she has been on a couple other channels, but I thought it was really important to bring her back because there's been a lot of new developments. There's been new developments concerning Dog and Nick the Hat, and what they're doing that I'm going to discuss. Fortunately, they're keeping me well in the loop. I know many of you might be following some of the things that have been going on. I've been posting as well. But please welcome to the stage, Julia. She's going to give us some education, a lot of education about dogs and dog handling. She's been involved with canines since she was 8 years old. So without further ado, we are going to welcome Captain in the U.S. Army, canine handler, and she actually works interdiction narcotics too in terms of canines and terrorism, counterterrorism. Julia, welcome to the stage.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. How are you? I got to make sure you're here. Here we go. Let's see if I can get a better picture. There we go. So great to have you here. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me here. You just missed Gator. Gator was just over here. He's playing with his ball right now.
Oh, good. Listen, to start off, again, we thank you for being here and sharing your expertise. This platform is all about getting down and dirty with facts and helping everybody in the audience, including me, understand the capabilities of canines. So if you could please tell us a little bit about your background to start off.
Sure. So I knew after, September 11th, I wanted to join the military. And what I wanted to really do was originally be a firefighter in the military, actually. So I joined a recruiter, and he promised me I'd be a firefighter, but instead he originally slated me as a fueler. And I'm like, well, I don't want to be like, how do we go? Whatever he thought. So I went to basic, and then I actually saw when I was at basic, military police officers doing demonstrations with these German shepherds, and I was looking and I'm like, that's really like cool. They're like basically police officers, and the drill sergeants, like, that's exactly what they are. They're canine handlers. They're 31 series military police officers. So I was like, you know what? I don't want to be a firefighter or a fueler. Like, I want to go do that. So when I was enlisted, that was my job. I was an enlisted canine handler, and then went to college, became an officer. And the bad news about being an officer is I can't personally handle a canine in the Army. The workaround for that is, since I'm a captain, I oversee force protection, counterterrorism. Canines are a force protection measure. So as long as I keep my canines nationally certified, they're eligible to perform on military posts with me and doing duties, which is why I know some people are confused, but that's why I can take them home with me. They're able to serve in a position because of their national certification, because that covers, military, police, all kinds of departments, arson for like fire department canines. So now I love what I do. I get to be, still be a captain. I'm an AGR, active guard reserve, which means reserve units don't run themselves. People think being a reservist means you only meet once a month and 2 weeks during the summer. Reserve units don't run themselves. You have to have somebody there on site or remote, because we were remote during COVID, planning the training calendar, planning the year, planning for the next deployment cycle. So that's how reserve units run. A lot of people think once a month and that's it, but then no training plans would get done. I just had Marley with me. We just did an inspection out in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and she loves going, and she's an explosives canine.
Yeah, explain who Marley is and what is her specialty.
Oh, she's a Belgian Malinois. She's all black with some fawn in her back. And she's an explosives and tracking. She's a dual purpose canine. She does explosives work. So she was coming in, she was checking all the gear, because this unit did just come back from a very late annual training exercise. Normally it's not in the fall, it's usually a summer thing. And she was checking their gear, and we were teaching the troops, how does a canine check gear when you come back from a mobilization? How do you check shipping containers? Because this was a transportation battalion we were searching. So she was going and she was searching the containers, and I was showing, here's how she would indicate. Obviously, she didn't find anything. So what we do is, with our canines, we like to give them a reward at the end. So I have an odor print, a C4 odor print. So I had a soldier go and hide it. I didn't want to know where it's at. So this way, after Marley does a regular search, I tell her to go search another container. So she goes, and then she found the print, she sits, and she gets her reward. So that way she's actively engaged and she's satisfied. So, if there's nothing to be found, we like to give them something to look forward to at the end there, because she wants her ball. That's all she wants.
And so what does it look like when they alert? Like in this case with Marley, what does she do to show you?
So there's two different kinds of alerts a canine can do. There's a active alert and there's a passive alert. So a passive would be, a sit, or a lay down. So Marley will lay down. Gator, my narcotics and tracking canine, he will sit. So, and an active would be, sometimes the dog will bark, or sometimes they'll stand up and start pacing. It's all handler dependent, but there's two types. It's active or passive. We like passive alerts because, especially for explosives canines, a canine can't be pawing at a bag, or, being like, hey, look what I have here, especially an explosives canine. But that's what an alert looks like. It's usually for us, we like to do sits or laying down. For me, a laying down is more of a full commitment, because sometimes the whole false alert thing, which I can go into at some point, sometimes false alerts are triggered due to handler training error. So that way, and like a lot of misconceptions is that if a canine does have a false alert, that doesn't 100% mean it was a false alert. It could have been a residual odor. So that's why I'm going down a rabbit hole. But that's why there's some misconceptions. But to answer your question, Marley lays down. I like laying down because it's a full commitment. A lay down because she's fully committing. Gator sits, but he was trained that way before we certified together. He was trained to sit. And he kind of tilts his head and stares at the drugs when he finds them. So he's entertaining.
Great. So I want to now go in. I mean, obviously, you have a lot of training, a lot of experience. How many full years? I looked at all your certifications and my head started rolling. It was like, wow, it's just certification after certification, blah, blah, blah. But I want to understand, can you just give me the number of years that you've been handling dogs for this purpose in the military?
Since I officially graduated AIT, joined in 2008, officially certified in 2009 for the very first time. It was my very first canine certification that I did was in 2009. And that was my explosives canine Dahlia. I sent you a picture of me and her with some of my soldiers. That was my very first canine, and she was amazing. I miss her. She was incredible.
Oh, sorry you lost her. A dog lover, have a dog, in love with dogs. So I can't even imagine losing a dog. I haven't had a dog for many years, and now I have one. And when I lost Tigger, it was bad. I said, I don't want a dog, because you fall in love with them, and then 8 to 10 years later, you know you're going to lose them.
Yeah.
But here we are. So not to digress, I want to get straight into Sebastian Rogers and take away some of the myths and some of the misunderstandings in terms of what really happened on the 26th in the morning to your understanding. And just so the audience knows, Julia has had a lot of interface, we'll just call it interface, with the Sumner County Sheriff's Department, TBI, and the other handlers that were involved. So she doesn't speak from a place of hearsay. She speaks from a place of knowledge. And that was the biggest reason why I wanted her on. So let's first talk about Max, because I think he's the central component to understanding really what happened that morning in terms of following a scent.
Right, exactly. And that's why I wanted to make sure you had copies of my paperwork. So and my communication with the TBI agents, so you could see. So a big thing is a lot of people refer to Ken, I can't think of his last name, Ken Widener, the EMA director from down there. So a lot of people watched the interview with him and Nick Barris, and Nick asked him about the scent. And Ken says, none of them, my understanding, were on a trail that led to Sebastian. Now, Ken wasn't lying when he said that, but it's not for the reason that people think. So Max is a dual purpose canine from Sumner County Sheriff's Office. He's trained in
Sorry, really quick. I just want to let the audience know Max was the dog that was on scene initially.
Yes.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So Max is a dual purpose canine from Sumner County. He's trained in narcotics and non-aggressive tracking. Non-aggressive tracking, I don't really like that word because it sounds really weird, but what that means is that canine's used for usually looking for a missing or endangered person. They're not a patrol canine. They're not looking for an apprehension at the end of their track.
A minute, I'm going to stop you there again just to explain that the difference is like with Cavalcante. Many of us remember a canine tracking, and then they grab them with the mouth and get them to the ground and hold them so they can be apprehended. So just to show you the juxtaposition of your point. Go ahead.
Yeah, that was a Bortak canine. That was Yoda from that dog he was a small mouth. That dog was awesome. But yeah, Bortak canine apprehended Cavalcante. That was pretty cool. But back to Max, he's trained in those two fields. So he's looking for a missing or endangered person. So that's why it specifically says now a patrol canine looks for a fugitive typically. So Max got on site right away, and he started at the last known sighting of Sebastian, which is the Proudfoot property. So a lot of people think, oh, but if she wasn't home to give him an article of clothing, or like, how did that work? So there's two different types of canines that are used when it comes to this type of work. I can't speak to search and rescue organizations because I'm not a search and rescue person. I'm specifically I work with law enforcement canine handler. So Max is a tracking canine. So tracking dogs can also be talked to about ground disturbance is what they're looking for. So they're not scent specific canines if they're a tracking dog. Now a trailing dog is a scent specific. Trailing dogs are the ones that are given an article of clothing. Max, like I said, is non-aggressive tracking. So when Max started at that porch and was sniffing around, he picked up on the freshest, cleanest track that he could possibly pick up on, and he took off in that direction. And you can hear in the audio the handler's out of breath. He's clearly running, and you hear him say, Max picked the track back up. So he's clearly tracking something. Now, for that canine, Max, to track over multiple Gator's about to come on my lap, I can tell. For Max to track over multiple surfaces like that, that's a lot of training that's involved in that, because most canines, if they lose a track, again, this is tracking dogs where they're not scent specific. So I can't emphasize that enough. Tracking dogs are not scent specific. Trailing canines are. They're the article canines. And Peace River's search and rescue canine from Florida, they have a very good description on their website too that people can look up. And so that's how Max was. Now, that's what Gator also is. Sorry, my phone's ringing and it's over there, but it'll shut off in a second. I got the Imperial March going on right now, so hopefully it doesn't ring for too long. Sorry about that. But we were talking about Max. So the handler was out of breath. For a canine to track over multiple surfaces like that, because you have to think, he went over grass, he went over asphalt, he went over dirt, and then he eventually wound up at the water where he jumps in the pond. So again, that's a well-trained canine. It's very hard to hold a track for that far and long. In grass, it's a bit easier, especially if there's a mildew or some kind of something to hold that scent in. But hard surface tracking is very hard to do. And Max went over a hard surface. He went all the way to that pond. So he was on the track of something fresh. Again, Ken isn't lying when he said it didn't lead to Sebastian. Sebastian was not sitting at the end of the track. Max is not a scent specific dog. He's not specific to an individual person. He was just looking for a track, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I want to expand on this because for our audience, if you're wondering and questions, people might have questions, but let me make this clear. When we're talking about a non-specific tracking dog, it's literally a dog that's going to track the most freshest human scent. So it picks up, but we don't know whether that's Katie, whether that's Chris, or whether that's Sebastian.
Correct. That's why Ken Widener was not lying when he said none of them led to Sebastian, because Max can't talk to us. He can't tell us who he was following. It'd be great if he could. This would solve a lot of things. But whatever was at that house and at that porch and left, that's what Max was tracking. Again, he's not scent specific. He's looking for that ground disturbance. So that's what he was looking for when he was tracking that track.
And to expand on that a little bit more, but it doesn't mean it wasn't Sebastian. It could have been Sebastian. And it's also not something from days ago. It would have been something fresh. So as we know, he disappeared at 6. We all know that at about 3 o'clock in the morning, there were these lights. Now, according to, and this is hearsay, because according to the Proudfoots and to Seth, as I recall, both said that law enforcement told them those were trash truck lights in the area. So if Seth isn't lying and if Katie and Chris aren't lying, then those were trash trucks, or that's what they were told, or law enforcement is not being forthcoming with the details about what those lights were. But this is all to say that if something was fresh that morning, it does make sense. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it could have been 3 cents, right? It could have been Katie and Sebastian that walked over there, or Katie and Chris that walked over there, whatever. Is that right?
It was just the freshest track, the most recent and freshest track he could find. So it could have been anybody. And that's why I said, if it had been, it wasn't from a couple of days ago, because again, if it were from a couple of days ago, there would have been footsteps all over that property, like in circles going to the driveway or whatnot. But that's why you shut down the scene right away and get that tracking dog in there as soon as possible, because you don't want multiple people crossing, because by that point in time later on in the day, more searchers are showing up. So you don't want that track compromised at all by more. That's why you shut down the scene and take that tracking dog from the last known point to wherever he's going almost immediately. And it sounds like Max was on location pretty fast based off of what I've been told from the audio. It sounds like he was there pretty quickly.
Yeah, very quickly. If you listen to the body worn camera footage that I've posted several times on my Twitter, you can hear them all discussing, oh, he picked back up again. And, and that's near that construction site, that retention pond, which then Max jumps into. So I will say this, from a logic standpoint, would it be logical, since Chris Proudfoot was purportedly not even in the area, for him to have taken those steps? Would it have been logical for Katie Proudfoot to have gone toward the retention pond? Or would it have been logical for Sebastian Rogers to have left that house, at least at some point, to make those tracks? For me, I'd look at possibilities and probabilities. Certainly possible for any of them. But I think the needle goes toward more probable that those tracks could have been left by Sebastian.
It was whoever went towards that area the most recently. That's who he was following. And people might say, well, what if like somebody walked out and came back? Again, if someone did walk out and come back and go inside the house, that's still probably the freshest track anyway, regardless, because we don't see any other movement that we know of in the yard after that time period. So whatever that was the freshest thing that Max picked up on. So, and Katie woke up the next morning, was running around the house looking for him. So there really wasn't any other type of like disturbance going from that point of the house all the way to that pond, like after whatever supposedly happened that night. So I wish Max could talk. He could tell us a lot of things. I really wish we could learn from him. So
let's talk about the other 4 canines, because although we've heard about a total of 12 that might have been involved at one point or the other, the ones that I understand to be involved, there are 5. But the other 4 were involved later. Can you tell us dog by dog what you know?
I can only speak to the 5 because in the very beginning, when I was talking to Seth, and I talked to Chris, and I talked to TBI, they all mentioned those 5 to me specifically because from what I'm gathering, they were the first 5 dogs that were there almost immediately. Now, any other dogs that came by after that, I honestly can't speak to. But I know EquiSearch had canines. I know there's a Cajun Navy person who had a Belgian Malinois that was there. I believe that was a cadaver dog, or a volunteer that was helping the Cajun Navy before I was even down there. And then TBI had a canine, and then the 2 Sumner County dogs. Both the Sumner County dogs are trained in the same thing, dual purpose narcotics and tracking. So I can only speak to those 5 dogs. Anything else after that, I honestly can't speak to, but it sounds like once those first 5 were done and out of the way, there were multiple dogs. And then there's the landfill search also. That was a whole other separate deal too. In Kentucky, I think the landfill was.
Right. And I want to talk a little bit about the different specificities of canines, because you turned me on to one that I had never heard of, that has to do with trauma, a trauma dog. So can you go through the different areas that dogs are trained in?
Sure. So we have explosives canines, which is like Marley. Then we have narcotics. So let me start. There's single purpose dogs, there's dual purpose dogs, and there's multi-purpose dogs. And that's just genetically whatever the dog can do. Like Marley, she's dual purpose. She's tracking and she's explosive. She's never going to be a patrol dog. We jokingly say she doesn't know how to bite, because I don't think she knows how to. If a burglar broke in my house, she'd hold the bag for them, I guarantee you. But then there's single, dual, multi-purpose. Now explosives, narcotics, contraband canines is a big one. And that's for like prisons with like cell phones, when people sneak cell phones into prisons. Especially the old flip phones, and the ones with the whole like circuit board, like those canines, those are newer into the system. There's electronics canines too, lithium ion battery canines. There's the trauma canines, like we mentioned. I never heard of that until the Chris Watts case, when they had the Labrador walking through the house. That's the first time I ever heard of a trauma canine. So I'm really fascinated by what trauma canines. It sounds like they go off of if there was like a struggle or something going on. there's something they pick. I don't know much about them, but I think they're fascinating. It'd be cool. I really want to learn more about them. And then we have the tracking canines, the trailing canines, and cadaver dogs, of course, too. So those are the canines that are just really, and it's incredible what these dogs can accomplish. Then you have your therapy dogs. The police departments, actually, there are certifications right now for police therapy dogs, and those dogs are like the 9/11 dogs, which were on site after September 11th, and they went and really helped those first responders out. So it's kind of like the Canine Good Citizen test, like the AKC does, only it's a police department level cert. So I think those are pretty cool.
That is really amazing. And I love how you just reeled all of that off, all these different areas. And I wanted to just, on a side note, let people know in the Bureau, in my experience, we only had cadaver dogs. When we needed an explosive dog, we contacted the ATF. When we needed a narcotic dog, we contacted the local sheriff's office, local departments that had their canines. I mean, I had them on speed dial when I was working narcotics. I actually have a really funny story. I won't share it now, but it's hilarious about when I called one of these canine handlers and he thought I was somebody else. So that's the story. But nevertheless, a lot of people think that the Bureau has all of these different areas of dogs. And unless something's changed, that's not the case. But I will say, I'm speaking about regionally in Texas, Dallas, Houston. Those were the offices that I worked at with the use of canines. So perhaps in other regions, but I guess this is all to say how closely we work with other departments, and because they have the ability to have their dogs with them all the time, and that is all they do. So it's an amazing what the dogs can do.
It's all in the department funding. Not every department can afford a canine specializing in every field, and a lot of people think you have to be a member of search and rescue to have a cadaver canine, and that's not the case, because like you said, you had them with the FBI. I've seen a lot of police departments have them. So there's an assumption that like you have to be a search and rescue person to have a cadaver dog, and that's not, or a tracking dog, and that's not the case at all. The certification is the same test, but they're all trained kind of differently leading up to that. I can't speak to search and rescue because I'm not a member, but from what I know, like you can't have apprehension canines in search and rescue. For the purpose of search and rescue, you're looking for a missing person or an endangered person. You don't want the canine, a patrol canine going out and being a dual purpose cadaver patrol canine and then actually biting somebody, that's why, search and rescue, there's certain rules about, what a canine can do, but, I'm sure there's plenty of search and rescue people here that could probably speak to that too. But you don't have to be a search and rescue person to have a cadaver canine. Because like you said, you had them in the FBI too, and like the Secret Service has them. Secret Service has a lot of Marshall, who's from the Philadelphia area originally. He had that dog Hurricane, the one who apprehended the guy who broke inside the White House during the Obama administration. Hurricane got really banged up that like the first dog, the handler let him go, and I guess his leash got caught up on a fence or something. So Hurricane went after the guy, and Hurricane, you guys can look him up. He's awesome. Hurricane fought that guy like with all that he had. He got Canine Medal of Valor for it. So like Marshall owns Hurricane's Heroes. It's a great ornament, but like Hurricane, that dog is 15 years old and still walking around like a badass dog. So he's awesome. And there's no age limit to canines either. So it's whenever a dog can no longer certify. Gator, who's on the table right now, he's 9. And some people said, well, isn't he too old? No, as long as he can pass the certification, we can certify as a team and he can function. There is no age limit to canines. So he's right here right now. So Gator, say hi.
Gator. Another question. There's a lot of people who have a misconception that dogs cannot search, scent, and water. Explain how they can.
Again, it all goes with training and experience. Putting your dog off of an odor. Like I've had people on site at like concerts ask me, "Hey, if I wanted to sneak weed past your dog, how do I do that?" And it's just like, A, why you ask me that, and B, he's still gonna probably smell it anyway. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing with like water. It's all about training and how often you expose the dog to it. Same thing with anything else. So a lot of canines who like lose the scent at the water, they're very capable. Canines are genetically capable of tracking, through water. But if they're not exposed to that enough, then they're not going to, figure out how to do it or how to be successful at that. So that's why with Gator, because he came from Arizona before I became his handler, he was so used to tracking in like a desert or tracking in like that type of environment. So when he came here to the Pennsylvania woods, when I first got him, he was good, but at first I kind of tell he wasn't confident. Like in dogs, 100%, canines, you can tell when they're confident and when they're not. And I could tell like he was kind of like, I think I know what I'm doing, but I'm not sure. He wasn't really exposed to the Pennsylvania forest. So we worked and worked and worked, and now he loves to track. He looks forward to tracking in the mornings, especially. And like the same thing with snow. You can't really stage snow, but I mean, snow, moisture, and whatnot. So like he's getting there. We haven't tried it in a while because we haven't had snow in Pennsylvania for a long time. But it's the same concept with snow as it is water.
So another question: when we know that Max jumped in that retention pond, and we know law enforcement drained that pond, and there was no Sebastian, is it reasonable to think that Sebastian or the person with that scent went into that pond, and that's why he jumped in?
He could have, or something. I mean, he could have stepped into the pond, or something ended at that pond. Now, if he was an article-specific canine, I would say if he was given an article at the beginning of the track and he followed it and then jumped in the pond, if he was article-specific, something also could have been discarded in there, and that's what he was still tracking. Because again, he's tracking the footsteps. So footsteps, one way or the other, led to that pond. And if Sebastian had walked through there because it was a more shallow area of water, he 100% could have been, still thinking, hey, something's here. That doesn't mean like that's where somebody no longer existed on this. I know, because I have to be careful. No longer existed on this planet at that point in time. But either way, something stopped there. The movement was halted at that point in time because he didn't abruptly stop anywhere else on that track. He continued up until that point. And I mean, if someone had walked through it and went to the other side, I have zero doubts with how well that dog tracked over grass, gravel, dirt. If someone walked through that and exited the other side, I have no doubt in my mind he would have continued through the pond and then got up and then still kept going. Because even if he was only paired with that handler for a shorter period of time, Max, I believe, is 5 years old, and he's been with a different department before. So the dog knows what he's doing. And I mean, they were still a certified team, so he had to know what he was doing to get that duty. Sorry, Gator's saying hi now. Hi, buddy.
So let me ask this question. What if, hypothetically thinking through this, Sebastian left his house, went to that pond, and something happened to him in that pond, later was found, maybe concerned about liability or something, and picked him up and took him? Would the dog know to pick up on the other scents coming away from that pond, or because his goal was to start with the original scent and follow it, then that's sort of the end of the game?
Let me answer this the best way I can. So whatever since Max was the tracking canine, whatever that freshest thing was, I understand what you're saying. Like if something happened there and then they realized, oh, let me go back, and it sounds like Max stopped and ended there. He didn't like get out and then walk towards like a parking lot like further off where someone could have carried somebody to a cart in the distance or something. The scent ended there. Now, if it was a scent specific canine, it could have been a bit different. But again, that all depends on the dog training and what he's been exposed to. But for me, from what I've gathered from the audio and from talking to other handlers, especially ones that have been in that area, it sounds like everything just stopped right there. And this is like with the Lacey Peterson case. That dog was an article trained canine. So they had her sunglasses, they gave it to the dog, but this is after the husband handled the glasses and gave them to the handler. Obviously the husband was wearing gloves when he handed them off, and that dog tracked to like that pier area and it just stopped. So at that point, that's why article specific canines, it can be finicky. And this is why I mentioned before in the beginning, if I'm doing an article search, I want a shoe insole because that has the person's sweat on it. The chances of like cross transfer whatnot are less, because I don't see someone taking someone's insoles out of their shoes all the time just to wash them. Or I mean, maybe people do that, but I mean, a shirt, like, think of how many people, like, if you wash your husband's clothes and whatnot, you've touched his shirt, he's touched his shirt. If like a buddy at work, like, kind of like give him a pat on the back, he's touched his shirt. Yeah, that scent isn't going to be as strong as you or your husband, but that's why I want like a shoe insole. Or I believe Nancy Grace asked about that carpet in Sebastian's room, because Sebastian was barefoot in his room. And he was walking around in his room. How often are other people going to be barefoot in his room aside from him? So I think she was asking about that for the canine, but it could have been anything. But I want something specific to that person with the least amount of cross-contamination possibility. But articles can be tricky.
So let me ask about that, because we know that Max picked up on a non-specific scent. Why in the world? And I thought I recalled, though, that they did give something like socks or other clothing. It was a little confusing. Different people said different things.
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't they use the article, to your knowledge?
Max is an article trained. He's looking for that ground disturbance. Now the later dogs, from what I was told, a pillowcase was taken, shoes were taken. Even Chris and Seth both had told me that, because I spoke to both of them about this, because I wanted to know like what each of them knew about the canines. There were clothes that were taken specifically for like, evidence and whatnot, and there were clothes that were taken specifically for canines. Because like some people say, well, our cops just going to give random handlers clothing if it's evidence. Well, that's why they take multiples. Some's held for evidence and some's used specifically for work, like, canines and everything. So that's how people who are like searchers can still get clothing through organizations. But yeah, to my knowledge, I know that one of the EquiSearch dogs was an article canine. So it just
wasn't that the dog with the Cajun Navy? Was that the Cajun Navy dog?
There was a couple. So there was the kid. Oh, are you thinking of the Malinois? Because I think that was a cadaver canine that.
I remembered that was a different area. So that's he was the only cadaver dog, I think, of the five.
That was the one that I saw, and a lot of people. I mentioned this to you. With the landfill search, there were canines at the landfill, and when people think about landfill searches, they automatically think, "Oh, it's a cadaver dog." That's not always necessarily the case, because again, what if you have an electronics canine looking for something? Here in Pennsylvania, we can't throw big electronics or lithium batteries out in our regular trash. They have to go specifically to a recycling center. So I haven't seen the probable cause. I have to see it myself. But I mean, just because canine search doesn't always mean they were cadaver dogs. I'm sure one of them was a cadaver canine, but you have to think we don't know, to quote Sheriff Craddock. But that could have been a lithium ion canine looking for electronics. It really could have been anything. And I mean,
those two, electronic or cadaver, pretty much, because you wouldn't need a narcotic dog in this case,
unless they were looking for his disposed medication. I wouldn't think so. But again, when people automatically think, and my mind used to go there too before I was a handler, like cadaver dog, obviously in a landfill, but that was before I knew about lithium ion canines. That was before I knew about narcotics and stuff like that. But I mean, I don't see an explosives canine going out there, but we don't honestly know. I mean, it could have been anything.
Well, and back to your point, because I think it's a great one that you and I talked about before, just what you're saying there. The dogs that were out on that landfill search could have been any practice. But my point always was, you do not do a landfill search unless you believe there is foul play. He didn't walk to that landfill in Kentucky. Somebody would have had to take him there, or the lithium batteries there, or his medication there, whatever they were searching for. No matter what, when you have a landfill search, and I know they tried to pass it off as this is routine. Yeah. I challenge you to find any case where there is a routine landfill search. You have to get a search warrant, which a probable cause statement has to be made. People think that those are so easy, and they're not. You sit there and you have to go through point by point what you have to prove to a judge. So a judge says, oh my gosh, I can actually get through the Sixth Amendment violation issue and let these people go in. And this is ultra invasive search, with multiple parties searching. So I loved when you told us that it could be different sorts of dogs in there, because I had never thought of a lithium battery, but sadly, it's still the same issue for me. That is law enforcement's concern about it being a foul play situation.
Right. I mean, and people think foul play means like, unaliving somebody, but it could mean disposal of evidence. It could mean anything. Honestly, foul play to me is any kind of negative intention. So that's why for me, it's just like in the beginning, I remember thinking, oh my God, it was obviously cadaver dogs. But the more I kind of sat back and took a break from everything for a bit, to focus on, taking care of, like, we have a unit coming up for mobilization sometime next year. So focusing on like full scale commander duties and stuff. I remember I was thinking, I was like, wait a second. I'm like, we never officially heard what those dogs were looking for there, because we've never seen the probable cause affidavit. We've never seen, for me as like, an MP when I was active duty at Fort Leonard Wood, the only time we wouldn't need a probable cause affidavit is like if we were responding to something and there was like a domestic next door and it was very obvious, like somebody was getting like battered, we could
exigent circumstances.
Right. That's yeah, exactly. Thank you. That's the words I was looking for. So that's a bit different, but for a land, and especially because you're dealing with state lines, it's a different state, getting a judge to do everything and working with different organizations. So you're right. It's very, there's a lot that goes into it, and the timing compared to when was the trash picked up versus when did they finally get out there. I thought it was day 8 that they were out there, but I could be wrong on that. Maybe someone else knows, but I thought it was day 8 that they were finally out there, but it could have been sooner or later. I'm not sure. I hear day 8 sticking in my mind for some reason.
It sticks in my mind about a week. And
yeah,
the biggest problem with that too was the Kentucky landfill, as I recall, was where the construction trash went, if I remember right. Or maybe it was the house trash. Gosh, I needed to re-look that up. But in other words, it was a different place. There were 2 different landfills that could have been involved in this case, right? Where their personal trash was versus the construction site. And they only covered one. That never made much sense to me either. But as I recall, it was the place. And somebody in chat might know, I hate to.
Yeah. I wasn't sure about that because I didn't hear that officially from, that doesn't mean it's not true, but I didn't hear it officially from like a law enforcement official. But I did hear that through a bunch of other people. So to me, that was weird because unless it's like a bulk trash or like disposal of special construction materials, like I said, here in Pennsylvania, we can't throw out big electronics, even computers. You have to schedule an appointment with like a recycling center and dispose of those. Now, if there was, hypothetically, if there were cameras in the house they thought of were disposed of, maybe they were just like, well, where are they now? They could have searched a recycling center before. We don't know. And honestly, we haven't really been told a whole lot in regards to this stuff. But sitting back and really looking at, like, taking a step back, and I started looking at this from, in the beginning, I was very emotionally involved. I was just like, oh my God, putting my heart into stuff. And then I was like, Julia, you have to take a step back. I've done commander's inquiry investigations before, active duty, and like when I was at Fort Leonard Wood, and even as an AGR, I've looked at both sides of the story. And when you do that, you ask yourself more questions. That's why I thought of what if they weren't cadaver dogs? What if they were a different kind of canine? Or looking at Max's actual profile and seeing what he was trained in, and thinking about Ken Widener's statement, thinking, oh my, he wasn't lying. He was telling a factual statement, that like, we don't know who that was, but it was something. So I just didn't want people to think the worst automatically, like, oh, there's no scent and Sebastian just poofed. There was a track of something from the house.
You couldn't say 100% it's Sebastian or
right.
who it would be. But
right.
You have to use, I could see that being used in a probable cause affidavit, because when you start, if Chris Proudfoot truly wasn't there, why would the mother leave? We have a missing child that could have, eloped, to use the word for autistic people who decide to leave. It makes some sense. And I think it's super important. But back to the article question. Why wouldn't, we talked about Max isn't trained in that, but you said there was one dog you thought trained. Did he get there too late, or do you know how that played out?
I honestly, I have to go back and I can send this to you in like an email later. I can't remember if it was the TBI canine or the Equisearch canine that was article trained. All I know is the two from Sumner County were those footstep trackers. Now, if it was an out of state person, that could have been why it was late on the article being used. For starters, but I'd have to go back and see which canine was definitely trained in which. But I mean, a scent can last, like an article specific canine scent can last for a couple of days, especially if someone's being moved around or something. That's a bit different because they're looking for that specific person scent as opposed to a footstep tracker. And I explain to people like this, for example, because everyone thinks you have to have an article of clothing. You don't. When an inmate escapes from a prison facility, the chances, yes, you turn in some stuff when you get your, but like the chances of them having like an article as like designated to their person, that's like, that's what the canines you see like going out and just tracking right away. It's because they're looking for that for inmates, especially. Most likely you're not going to have an article to track an inmate. That's why when I was explaining to people, like, you don't have to have an article to track a person. But back to your question, I'll find out for you for sure which canine that was and when they got there. But a canine can track a scent for multiple days, depending on the age, the training, what they're given as far as an article goes, and how well they can retain that. So it could have been they were there a little too late, but honestly, there's a lot of questions I still have in regards to that I haven't gotten full answers on yet.
So in regard to that, as far as you know, and as far as we know, did any canine of those first 5 track Sebastian?
As far as I know, those first 5, none were confirmed to track because they haven't found them yet. So as far as I know, of those first 5, at least, or even
of Sebastian based on an article. I should have been
clear, none that can be 100% confirmed because I've only heard hearsay. Like I heard a dog went to like a trash can somewhere. I heard a dog went to like the middle of the road. So, and that's what I've heard from through the streets. As far as I've been told from officials like TBI in Sumner County, who I have talked to, they only mentioned Max's track. But as far as like picking up a track for Sebastian, the dogs can't talk to us, so we won't know even if they are article specific. We'll never know, unfortunately. So I know that's not the answer that everybody wants to hear, but that's the truth. We honestly, we don't know, and that's what's really sad.
Yeah, it's sad because it's still really a question mark. I find it, though, as an investigator, important that a track was followed, a fresh track was followed. I think that's super significant, and that's one of the biggest reasons that I wanted you on, Julia, was really to educate us all on the breadth of what canines can do, and then specifically hone in on what happened with Sebastian. And I feel like, for me, you answered so many questions. Julia, what am I leaving out in terms of Sebastian and other searches that took place looking for him?
I honestly can't think of anything really right now. I'll remember something at like 2 a.m. watch, but I can't think of anything right now. Like I said, I really hope that he's found soon. The biggest thing is, unfortunately, we can't communicate with the dog, so we don't know. All I know is that Max, we have a saying in the canine world, and there's any other handlers in the chat, they can say this, or police officers. We say, trust your dog. And I trust my dogs when they're on a track of something, because I've questioned before when Gator hit on a peanut butter sandwich in a rehab facility. I kept thinking to myself, this is really embarrassing. Why is he hitting on a peanut butter sandwich? It turned out somebody was storing Xanax pills inside their peanut butter sandwich that somebody sent to them through a gift in the mail. So like, and I remember thinking, why didn't I just trust him? Because like at first I'm like, no, leave it alone. And then I said to the orderly, I'm like, for some reason he's saying there's something here. And the orderly took the sandwich out and he came back. He's like, you'll never guess. And then he told me, I was like, oh. And I looked at Gator and he's just sitting there just tilting his head all like, well, aren't you going to say good job? And I'm just like, yes. So that's why I say trust your dog. And the big thing I can't emphasize enough is Max went over multiple surfaces. He was pulling his handler. And I will say this, I know some people have asked me when I don't know about when you wrote your reports, if I were writing a report, I haven't heard law enforcement officially come out and say all issues were accounted for. I've only heard that through other people, and I think Sheriff Craddock even said in his interview. I think he said the mother said all the shoes were accounted for.
Said that.
So I haven't heard yet. That, people were thinking about him living barefoot, but like Seth was saying, and I do stand by. Seth was saying with the incident with the fire ants. I mentioned to you my cousin Dolores. She's not high functioning like Sebastian is. She's extremely withdrawn. Like she doesn't even like when she doesn't like anything sticky or anything being wet. So when she comes home and like if she's wearing long sleeves and her sleeves get like damp and like they're touching her skin, she doesn't like. And she doesn't like it because the one time that happened to her and she got freezing and she couldn't forget feeling so cold. So that's why like with the leaving barefoot thing, again, a footstep tracking canine is looking for that freshest track, whether they're barefoot or not. But it's just when I write reports, if I was talking about footprints, I would specify barefoot if I was talking about someone running away with like no shoes on. But from what I remember in the audio, I remember Max's handler saying boot prints because I think the dispatcher or the other officer asked barefoot prints. And I didn't hear Max's handler confirm that. I just heard him say footprints. But if I'm writing a report or something, I would say footprints regardless. I would specify barefoot. So that's the one thing I just thought about was the barefoot versus regular shoes thing. That's the only thing I can think of. So again, I haven't heard law enforcement officially confirm that yet. And I believe Seth, when he was saying Sebastian had the trauma from the fire ants thing, when Seth told me that story, he was very sincere and he was adamant. He's like, that was not a good experience for him. So, I mean, my heart breaks for all three of them. Honestly, I hate seeing it like this. I really hope we get an answer one way or the other. I don't have children, so I can't say I'm, I can sympathize with. It's just I feel horrible for them. So I just hope he's found soon. I really, really do. And
Beautiful words there, and I like that you brought that home because I remember listening to that recording, that body worn camera recording, and I thought they said shoe prints or footprint. There was no specification, and I thought they even asked. I need to go back and listen to that again. But as my recollection is, I thought somebody said barefoot or something to that degree, and he says no shoe prints or footprints. So that is interesting because is it I think Katie Proudfoot, at least from what we've seen of that house, was extremely organized. And what we know seems to be sort of, controlling whatever, in control of the space that she would know if he was barefoot or not. One of the biggest problems with this case, not to digress too much, is the fact that we really only have Katie Proudfoot's word for everything.
Yeah, and again, I don't have kids, but I know that there's been times in cases where I've interviewed people for commander's inquiry interviews when someone's really upset. I mean, you got to think her son's missing. She could have been interviewing and disclosed like all the shoes were here, but then later on, what if she's just like, I mean, nobody wants to be seen as like a liar to the eyes of law enforcement. Like if she said that it was, then she remembered there was another pair. She's already mentioned the shoes were accounted for. So I can see that. I mean, that could be, reaching, but I mean, I believe all three of these parents love Sebastian. I really, really do. And I've spoken to Seth. I've spoken to Chris. Seth was always nice to me. Chris was nice to me. Thanked me for my service. Seth thanked me for my service. I never spoke to Katie, voice to voice, but over Messenger a while ago, she asked me for a decal that my cousin helped me make, and I mean that was nice of her to ask. So I believe they all love Sebastian. I believe they all really do miss him, and I can see that clearly. I just hope he's found soon, and I'm sure Seth would love to take him fishing again and out in the boat and stuff. I mean, I've never been fishing before, but it sounds like that's something they really enjoy doing, with spending the time together. So I really hope that he's brought home soon. So
thank you so much, Julia. Thank you for your service. Thank you for the time you spent tonight. Thanks for sharing your knowledge, which a lot of people don't have the knowledge breadth that you have in this arena. So thank you so much for joining us. And I just appreciate you and everything you've done for our country too.
Same to you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me. So it was great talking to you. And I wasn't reading the comments. I was just trying to stay focused on what we were talking about.
I read them kind of at the end when it's all over.
Yeah.
And try to answer questions because I like to have the dialogue and get it all out, all the questions. So
yeah, and I just wanted to stay focused on like the facts and not, there's a lot going on in this case. So I just wanted to stay very clear-minded and focused. But thank you so much again for having me, and I hope you have a good rest of your evening. And I think we're going to be getting snow here in Pennsylvania sometime in the next few weeks. So that's going to be, we'll have to do some tracking the snow training for sure.
To go track and snow.
We'll
Julie,
try it.
Stay in touch, and thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Wow. She was a knowledgeable guest. I'm going to go ahead and look right now. Yeah, everybody's saying thank you for your service. I'm sure she'll go back and look at all these. Could, might, maybe. No kidding. It's so frustrating. This whole case. TBI never agreed to have her on the team. Well, that is at issue. I know there's a lot of legal things going on. I always say this channel, I'm just not about drama. I can tell you, though, I think that was, who was that wrote that? I can tell you that I've seen the paperwork and she was allowed to be on part of the team. I read the letters. So, but that'll all come out. It's really a crying shame. This case, and I'm seeing it in so many cases, certainly the Karen Reed case. I'm already seeing it in the Koberger case. I saw it even a little bit in the Delphi case. People are going to have their opinions, and many people are going to try to help. And I will never understand, and I don't know where it happened in the true crime community, because when I first got involved in the true crime community, man, we were all for one for all. We were looking for the missing. We were each using our platforms to get their names, their faces out there. We were making calls and tracking things behind the scenes. We were truly advocating as a unit. And then what happened, it just seemed, I watched this happen since Gabby Petito. I got involved sort of in Gabby Petito, but really not even in Gabby Petito, except for when Brian Inton would throw me up on Twitter, and I wasn't even on Twitter. My Twitter account started in 2017 strictly so I could watch the advancement of my son's football career. I never tweeted about anything. So never even thought about that. It wasn't until after Gabby Petito that I started posting and really getting involved, really because Brian Inton, who's a reporter that I worked with, said it's so important to engage in the community because you'll learn so much. And oh my gosh, was he ever right? I know what happens in a case on Twitter before it ever hits mainstream media. You all probably see that too. So in any event, I'm certainly, I think, glad I'm involved in it, the social media aspect. But Julia was really beat up. There's a lawsuit now. Thank goodness. I hope she wins because I've never understood why the different facets, why we can't all help each other, because it's not useful not to help each other. And for people to be slinging mud at each other, it's just something I don't understand. I come from team environment, team with sports, team dynamic at my household, and a team dynamic in law enforcement to the nth degree and SWAT. And you operate as a team, you have each other's backs. And to be in this environment where everybody is backstabbing people and getting on their accounts and calling people out as liars and everything is just beyond really my comprehension, because people will be success by doing the right thing and working hard in their endeavor. You never will have success, long-lasting, by stepping on others to build to success. That's just my soapbox. I'll get off of it now. But my support is for Julia. And like I said, she sent me all the paperwork. So I am working from that regard. And it'll all come out because now there's a defamation case involved. Let's see. Any questions about anything to do with Sebastian for now? I really wanted to, I know we have 2 other cases to discuss. I'm going to do those super quickly because we spent a long time on Sebastian. I have so wanted to do a Sebastian episode. I want to bring out the fact that Dog the Bounty Hunter, as you all know, many of you know, got involved in this case. He's ponied up, he and Nick the Hat have ponied up $75,000 that they are pledging if there's information that leads to either finding Sebastian or knowing what happened to Sebastian, that they are going to, they've pledged that. $50,000 was also offered by the FBI. This is very rare. We've talked about this before on another show, so I don't want to belabor it, but it's extremely rare. You can look at all the other cases, Harmony Montgomery, Summer Wells, Michael Vaughn. I could give you so many other cases, especially Michael Vaughn, because that was so much handled by the Bureau. You didn't see a $50,000 reward come out, I don't believe, on any of those cases from the Bureau, except for Michael Vaughn. If it happened, I didn't see it. But my point is, it's very unusual, and they're not doing that because they think he's just missing. That's how I read it. That's my take. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'll own it. But that's my take on that. The reason they're offering a reward is because they are a criminal investigative agency, and they believe there's information pertaining to what happened to him, whether he was taken and abducted or whether he was murdered. So that's their interest. The FBI's interest in this case is of an investigative criminal extent, not a runaway. They don't offer $50,000 rewards for runaway cases. That's my belief. All right. Let's see. Really quickly, I want to talk about Laken Riley. Laken Riley was a college student. She was a nursing student at Augusta College, but she was on the University of Georgia campus where she liked to jog these trails that a lot of individuals jog there. She was brutally murdered, and this case is now in trial. The prosecution just rested, and whew, first of all, the opening statement was amazing because it consolidated what their evidence was, as good as I've ever seen done. Made it very easy to track what the prosecution said they had, and then they came back and had it. And specifically on that one, the things that I just wanted to point out that jumped out to me: 20 minutes that Jose Ibarra is a illegal alien. People are saying, a lot of people think alien is somehow a derogatory and a negative word. It is not. It is the word that is the legal definition of someone illegally or somebody here of foreign origin. And in probable cause affidavits that I did throughout my career, in all legal documents, federally throughout my career, it's an illegal alien. It's not an illegal migrant or an illegal immigrant. And so I'm going to continue to use the legal word that I've always been taught. And that's alien. So the fact that Jose Ibarra was here illegally, he'd been arrested on 2 other occasions, once a shoplifting situation and another time had to do with driving, but putting, I guess, a child in peril through his driving. 2 times, both times somehow the ICE detainer never got put on him, so he got out. It is a travesty, and I'm so glad Laken Riley's parents are suing the government, because he shouldn't have been there. So that just tells you Laken Riley should be alive today. Without illegal passage to this country, and then him not being appropriately handled once he was here and was doing illegal things, I think they're going to win that lawsuit. I can't imagine they won't. Secondarily, 20 minutes with her. I'd say a long time. That probably included some of the stalking, but this is when their cell phones were there and together. The evidence in this case is overwhelming. His DNA is under her fingernails. I always teach in my classes, if you do get overcome, if you cannot get away, please scratch, bite, get that DNA so at least that person can be brought to justice, because you'll save a life. You'll save a life, possibly, because people who commit these crimes, this isn't their first rodeo and it's not going to be their last rodeo. They keep committing them. And I truly don't believe this was Jose Ibarra's first rodeo. According to the prosecution, he literally was stalking her. When I say stalking her, I'm not saying he targeted her and stalked her and everything. I'm saying he looked for an opportunity, someone to attack. And once he found Laken alone, jogging, he was on the prowl. I'll call it prowl instead of stalk. He was on the prowl. He actually moved her body way off that trail. She tried to call 911. He grabs the phone. His fingerprint is on the phone. He later throws away his articles of clothing, gloves, and a shirt. I believe it's on tape. Him throwing something in there, that's retrieved. That has his DNA. The glove has his DNA. It's not the brother. The brother is closely linked with Tren de Aragua, the Venezuelan ruthless gang. In court, I didn't see this, but it was told to me. I did not see this part of the testimony. I don't know how I missed it, but I was told today on Twitter that Jose Ibarra was also linked to Tren, the gang. I wouldn't at all be surprised, because his brother was a member, and that has been corroborated. We have pictures. I've posted that on Twitter as well, Twitter X. But my point is about him being illegal. This is what is in my craw. He was actually staying at the Roosevelt Hotel in Manhattan. It's a beautiful hotel. And he was living there. It's about $275 a night by New York standards. That's not exactly a 5-star. But this is a beautiful, nice hotel. That's where the government was putting him up. Then he requested, a plane ride, basically, whatever paperwork they made him fill out with what other bogus information he had. And the government flew him from New York to Georgia, and Georgia is where then he attacked Laken. We have our vets homeless on the streets. We have homeless mothers. We have homeless children. And yet we somehow are finding the millions and millions of dollars to house illegal aliens in hotels and to fly them about. And I've known about this for a long time, for over 2 years. Actually, Brian Innan and I were going to do a story about this when it first broke, about the planes that were being paid for by the U.S. government, and an informant, or non-informant, a border patrol person who is good friends with an FBI agent that I'm very close with, told him what was going on. The FBI agent that I'm close friends with then told me. And I said, oh my gosh, we have got to break this wide open. It ended up getting broken later. We couldn't break it open because by the time News Nation confirmed, yeah, we want to run with this, but then we had to get Brian's schedule, my schedule. And then by the time we got back to them, the border patrol agent and the contractor were so terrified. At that point, they said, we just can't go. We talked about doing it in shroud. We talked about being, behind a canvas. Anyway, we didn't end up breaking that story, but it was broken. And who cares as long as it's broken, because the government was hiding what was happening. And it's all going to come out. It's coming out. This came out on the stand, this particular situation. So that's how we know the hotel, and that's why we know he was flown, and it's all documented. So anyway, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Laken in that way. My prayers go out to her family. They had to sit there and listen to how she was brutalized. The ME spoke and said it was a cross between blunt force trauma, a rock smashing her skull in. It completely realigned her face and skull. I mean, as described, almost just horrifically bashed in her skull. And then asphyxiation. The ME didn't exactly describe how that happened, whether it was a strangulation. That wasn't discussed, but asphyxiation was involved. horrific. And it's clear that she fought for her life. And, I think that was at least an important part for making this an ironclad case because of the DNA under her fingernails. So, again, justice for Laken Riley. What's really sad, in my opinion, I'm not a big death penalty proponent. But when it comes to children, kids who haven't even started their life, certainly young kids, but even kids that are in college, they're still supported by their parents. They haven't had an opportunity to start their life. They're like a young bud, a rosebud that's just getting ready to bloom. I'm for the death penalty, and I'm for the death penalty in this case, definitely. However, the DA that was on this case before the new DA was voted in, she took it off the table. So it can't be put on. It's off the table, and it's a crying shame, because as we're coming to find out in the Susan Smith case, this is a perfect segue. Life doesn't necessarily mean life. The jurors in the Susan Smith case believed it was life. The prosecutor talked about that, how it was life after 1996, but it was grandfathered in, that it wouldn't necessarily be life, but that was not well understood. And so it was believed, I believe at the time, that Susan Smith was going to be there for the rest of her natural life. And that's not what we're seeing. Now she's up for parole. What did she do? She murdered her 3-year-old and her 14-month-old by strapping them in their car seats and rolling a car into a lake for them to drown. That's bad. I mean, can you imagine how terrified a 14-month-old would be? Remember, that's over a year. They kind of get what's going on. And a 3-year-old, it would have been horrific. And then she got on television. She blamed a black man, unspecified black man, for doing this, and cried and sobbed and got her hair perfect with bows and told us all about how terrible it was, when really the whole motive was so she could be with another man, and that other man didn't want children. The lack of empathy that you have to kill your own children, in my experience, is zero empathy. And to think that they can let out somebody that, as a trait that's deep in their core, to have zero empathy, to kill their own children, to lie about it, to look out for no one else but themselves, they're a danger to the community. If you can kill your kids, you can kill anyone. And do I think she's rehabilitated? No, because behind bars, even as recently as a couple of weeks ago, she was going against the violation or the rules within incarceration to do with sex and drugs. So no, she's not rehabilitated. If she gets out, and there's been over 300 letters, I posted the exact number on my Twitter, that have been written trying to get her out. It's like the Menendez brothers. Everybody's, every socialite, nobody looks back to the facts of these crimes. Leslie Van Houten, Charles Manson follower, who was supposed to get the death penalty. It got commuted in California across the board. Then she was supposed to get life. Then that got commuted because they say she's rehabilitated. What about the LaBiancas, who were stabbed 42 times, I believe? Their blood smeared all over their house. And then afterwards, Leslie Van Houten and everybody else sat and ate from their refrigerator, and after smearing blood and writing in blood and brutally stabbing them. And Charles Manson wasn't even there to say, you got to do this. Anyway, people get out all the time. I always say this about, if Brian Kohberger is convicted, if he's found guilty, Brian Kohberger, if he doesn't get the death penalty, if that's not kept out on the table, 30 years from now, when I'm dead, and maybe some of you will be dead, but I'm not dead from Menendez. I'm not dead after 30 years with Susan Smith. I well remember Leslie Van Houten. I'm alive now to talk about that. Wait until 30 years from now, when they're saying, oh, Brian Kohberger, he was such a great guy. He was just studying hard. He deserves a life. He was only in his mid-20s when he did it. Let's give him a chance. That is how I feel every time I hear about the Menendez brothers. I hear about Susan Smith. I hear about Leslie Van Houten and so many others, the non-big names that are getting out. People getting out for child molestation after 3, 4 years, 5 years. If you haven't listened to it, there's a segment I did here on Break the Case. It's called Crime on Bond. I hope you take a chance to listen to it. It's with an attorney, a bond attorney. He was fabulous. Like, could some people consider it dry? I didn't consider it dry. I love to hear about the law and what's going on. It was a really good segment about crime is on bond. Everybody's getting bonded. Everybody's getting paroled only to go out and commit more crimes. All right. So off my soapbox there. Tomorrow morning, she goes before the parole board. There's 7 people that are going to decide her fate, and all she needs is 4. All she needs is 4. 4 people to check the box, paroled, stamp it, paroled. If 4 people out of the 7 say paroled, Susan Smith is going to get out. Watching that one closely. Laken Riley, I think this trial will be wrapped up in the next couple of days for sure. And then, hopefully justice will be served there. He will have to do his sentence here. And if he gets life without the possibility of parole, hopefully he will not be going back to Mexico. He'll be here and have to face justice here. Again, Sebastian Rogers, every day, I think many of us think about him. I think about him every day. I hope you all continue to use your platforms. I barely see anything about him right now. There's a lot of lawsuits going on because of the defamation and the horrible way people are getting treated that are just trying to help. They're trying to find him. They're trying to help. 6 months ago, I read a letter from Chris Proudfoot and Katie Proudfoot saying, we are not going to allow any canine handlers anywhere on our property. Not that a scent could be followed or anything could be done at this point, but that was 6 months ago. I never really understood that. I think if a canine handler came to me and said, listen, I think I can help in some way, I think I'd say anything, please bring it on. Whatever help I can get. Not trying to judge them. They're the ones that are missing a child, not me. And I think Julia did a good job of saying, listen, in her view, she thought all of those parents who she spoke to, 2 of them, truly love their child. I can tell you Seth Rogers does. And I know he wasn't involved because his alibi checked out. So Seth is not involved. I hate what's happened to our true crime community. We should all come together. Just think how strong we could all be if we came together on these cases instead of throwing dirt and slinging mud at everybody. All right. Thank you all for being here. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, I so agree. Sam's pretty paranormal says, that the FBI should have gotten in earlier. I agree. It was always kept at the local county level. I think that was a huge mistake, but that's just me. I mean, we saw it happen with Summer Wells. It's the same song, second verse, could be better, but it is worse. Sebastian Rogers, still no answers, but at least we know there was a scent that left and stopped at that retention pond. Was that the scent of somebody taking Sebastian to that area? Was that the scent of Sebastian walking to that area? We don't know. Going to keep digging. I was going to say really quick, Dog is putting a lot of attention on this from the standpoint of he has a great social media presence. We need that. We need Dog's voice. Nick has a great following. We need his following. We need their voices. And we need the amount of money and resources they're putting into this because they are. I know for a fact, I posted this. They get leads. People often don't want to go to police, but they will go to Dog the Bounty Hunter to say, Dog, I know this. And that's what happened. I think it was Saturday night. And then Dog, of course, gave that to the police. The police descended on the situation. They were able to show that the child was not Sebastian Rogers, kind of a scare, or not a scare, but kind of a good scare, because could be alive, happened in North Carolina. So let's use our platforms to positively support anyone and everyone looking for Sebastian Rogers. Listen, there's a couple of yo-yos. I hate being in this community, or I don't hate anyone or hate anything, but I dislike them being in the community because I think that they have very ill intention and aren't good humans. But I do not go after them because I think it'll ferret itself out, first of all. And then second of all, if we can have other eyes and other platforms bringing the name Sebastian Rogers to households, that's a good thing. All right, everyone. Until next time, thank you so much for being here. May justice be served.